In the winter of '81, the past finally caught up.
The morning I walked out of St. Brendan's Home for Girls, the nuns handed me a manila envelope with $1,150, a one-way bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of, and a single sheet of paper with an address scrawled in pencil. My name was misspelled on the envelope. The case number was right. The word "discharged" had been stamped in red ink across the front, crooked like whoever pressed it down was already thinking about lunch. I was 18 years and 2 months old. I owned 2 changes of clothes, a wool blanket that smelled like mothballs, and a small wooden box I'd carried since I was 4. The box had no keyhole. The nuns told me when I was old enough to ask that it belonged to someone who loved me very much and would come back for me one day. I stopped believing that before I turned 10. What I didn't know, what nobody in that orphanage knew, or pretended not to know, was that the address in my envelope wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a deed to 90 acres of Oregon timberland, to a farmhouse nobody had set foot in for 18 years, and to a cave hidden in the ridges above it that my mother had walked into in the autumn of 1964 and never walked out of. My name is Ellie Hayward. At least that was the name they gave me. The morning I walked out of St. Brendan's Home for Girls, the sky over Portland was the color of wet newspaper. It was the 14th of November, 1981, a Saturday. There was frost on the hoods of the cars in the lot, and somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at nothing, the way dogs do when they're cold and lonely and have forgotten what they were barking about. I know the date because Sister Theodora handed me a manila envelope with it typed on the front. My name was misspelled. The case number was right. The word "discharged" had been stamped across the corner in red ink, crooked, like whoever pressed it down was already thinking about lunch. I was 18 years and 2 months old. The envelope contained $1,150 in cash, a one-way Greyhound ticket to a town called Cedar Hollow, and a single sheet of paper with an address scrawled in pencil. Route 12, Box 47. That was everything the state of Oregon considered I needed to begin a life. My duffel bag was on the floor by my feet. Inside it were 2 changes of clothes, a wool blanket the color of cigarette ash, a toothbrush still in its paper packaging, and a small wooden box I'd carried since I was 4 years old. The box had no keyhole. Sister Theodora was at the front desk, pretending to look for something in a drawer. She had been pretending to look for something in that same drawer for almost 10 minutes. I understood. She was waiting for me to leave. That was the polite version of goodbye at St. Brendan's. You stood at the door long enough for somebody to notice you were standing there, and then you opened it yourself, and then you walked through. And that was the part of your life that ended. The bus leaves at 9:15, she said without looking up. From the terminal on Killingsworth, you'll want to be early. I know. Mr. Voss in Cedar Hollow is closed on Saturdays. You'll see him Monday morning. Mr. who? She looked up then. Her eyes were the soft brown of an old chair, and behind her glasses they did something I'd never seen them do before. They flinched. The attorney, she said, for your mother's estate, The information's in the envelope. I turned the envelope over in my hand. Front, back. There was nothing about a lawyer. There was nothing about a mother. There was nothing about an estate. Sister, what estate? She closed the drawer. She closed it carefully, the way you close a drawer when there's something inside it you don't want to think about anymore. You should have been told sooner, she said. I'm sorry. I assumed Mother Felicia had spoken to you. Spoken to me about what? It's not my place, Ellie. The attorney will explain. Just keep that envelope safe. And the box. Keep the box especially safe. She would not look at me again after that. She turned and walked back across the lobby, her shoes clicking on the tile, and disappeared through a door marked private. I stood there for what felt like a long time. The frost on the windows had begun to soften in the corners where the morning sun was reaching it. Through the glass, I could see the limestone steps where I had stood when I was small, watching cars pull up and watching couples climb out and watching them go in to talk to Mother Felicia about adopting somebody. They had never adopted me. I had been told once when I was 9 that I was hard to place. I had not understood what that meant. I understood it now. I picked up the duffel bag. I opened the door. I walked out into the cold, and I closed the door behind me, and that was the part of my life that ended. The Greyhound rolled south on Interstate 5, with the windshield wipers running for most of 300 miles. Oregon in November is a country that has forgotten the sun. The fir trees pressed in close on both sides of the highway, dark and dripping, and the sky hung low between them like something that had been laundered too many times. I sat against the window with my forehead on the cold glass and watched the mile markers go by and tried not to think about anything. Across the aisle from me was an old man in a flannel shirt and a brown felt hat. He was reading a Louis L'Amour paperback with the cover half torn off. Every now and then he would look at me and then look back at his book and not say anything. I appreciated that. I had spent 18 years being looked at by people who then said something. It was a relief to be looked at by somebody who did not. In my coat pocket, the wooden box pressed against my ribs. I could feel its edges through the lining. I had taken it out of the duffel bag at the station because the duffel bag had a broken zipper, and because for some reason I could not explain even to myself, I did not want it out of my sight. It was small. Maybe 6 inches long, 3 inches wide. Dark walnut, oiled smooth by my fingers, over 14 years. There was no lock on the front, no clasp, no hinge I could see. Just a tight seam running around all 4 sides, where the lid was supposed to come away from the base. I had tried over the years to open it. I had tried with butter knives, with hairpins, with the back end of a pencil. I had tried prying it. I had tried twisting it. When I was 7, I had tried very briefly to break it on the corner of a radiator, and Sister Catherine had taken it away from me for a month and given it back without saying anything. The box had no keyhole. The box had no key. Somebody had given it to a 4-year-old girl and said her mother had left it for her and had said nothing else. I turned it over in my lap as the bus climbed into the Coast Range. On the bottom, almost worn smooth, was a small carving. I had traced it with my thumb 1,000 times. It was a circle with a line through it, and inside the circle a rose. I had no idea what it meant. I closed my hand around the box and put it back inside my coat. Cedar Hollow, Oregon sits in the bottom of a green bowl in the Coast Range about 12 miles inland from the Pacific. The bus pulled in at 3:20 in the afternoon, and the rain had stopped, and there was a kind of cold silver light coming through the clouds that made the wet streets look like they were made of pewter. The bus station was not really a bus station. It was the side of a hardware store with a bench and a sign and an ashtray full of rainwater. I stepped down onto the curb with my duffel bag, and the bus pulled away, and that was that. The town was 3 blocks of storefronts on a single street that ran north and south. There was a diner called Maeve's. There was a feed store, a bar called the Spar, a barber shop with a candy-striped pole that was not turning, and a small white church with a steeple that needed paint. Behind the storefronts, the mountains rose dark and shaggy with old-growth fir, and somewhere up in those mountains, according to a sheet of pencil-marked paper, I owned 90 acres of land. I did not feel like somebody who owned 90 acres of anything. I walked down to the diner because I didn't know what else to do. The sign in the window said, "Open," and through the glass, I could see a man in a brown work coat sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee. There was a pickup truck parked out front. The truck was a 1968 Ford F100 two-tone green over white, and the bed of it was full of cedar fence posts wrapped in a blue tarp. I went inside. The diner smelled like bacon and old coffee, and the kind of hot grease that has lived in a fryer since before you were born. The man at the counter looked up when I came in. He was somewhere in his middle 50s, broad through the shoulders, with a gray crew cut and a face that had spent 40 years outside. There was a Marine Corps tattoo faded on the back of his right hand. His eyes were the steady gray of weather you wouldn't go out into if you didn't have to. He looked at me. He looked at my duffel bag. He looked at the wet shoulders of my coat. He looked back at his coffee. "You the Sutton girl," he said. I did not move for a moment. "My name is Ellie Hayward." He set the cup down very carefully on the saucer. "That right," he said. It was not a question. He was just saying it. The way a man might say that right when somebody tells him the sky is green. He didn't argue with it. He didn't agree with it. He just set it down on the counter between us like a thing he was going to come back to. "Carl over at the depot said somebody was riding in from Portland today," he said. "Said she'd be 18, dark hair, carrying a duffel bag, and one of them little wooden boxes." He did not look at my coat pocket, but he didn't have to. "Said she'd be the Sutton girl coming to see Cal Voss. Mr. Voss is a lawyer." "That's right." "Sister Theodora said my mother's estate." He turned on the stool. He looked at me full on for the first time, and there was something in his face that was not pity and was not curiosity. It was older than either of those. It was the look a man gets when something he had stopped expecting finally walks through a door. "Sit down, miss," he said. "Have some coffee. I'll run you out to the place when you're ready." His name was Buck Caldwell. He didn't tell me much about himself in the truck because Buck Caldwell was not the kind of man who told you much about himself. But I gathered enough from what was in the cab. There was a Korean War Veterans Association sticker on the back window. There was a St. Christopher medal hanging from the rearview mirror with the corners worn round from somebody's thumb. There was a Bible on the dashboard with a leather cover and a strip of red ribbon hanging out of the middle of the Book of Job. The radio was tuned to a country station out of Coos Bay, and Merle Haggard was singing about a working man's blues, and Buck Caldwell drove with one wrist on the wheel and the other elbow on the open window, and the rain coming sideways through the gap. "You from Portland," he said after about 3 miles. "St. Brendan's, the home." He nodded once. "You always been there?" "Since I was 4. He did not say anything to that. He nodded again slower and adjusted his hands on the wheel. We passed a logging road that turned off into the trees and was barred by a chain. We passed a sign that said, "Falling Rock." We passed a small wooden cross stuck in the gravel of the shoulder with a faded plastic flower tied to it. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, "why does everyone in this town seem to know who I am?" He took a long breath through his nose. "Because they were waiting for you, miss. For me. For somebody. 18 years now. There was a young woman lived out where I'm taking you. Rosalind Sutton. Disappeared in the fall of '64. Her people held the land out at Hollow Ridge for 3 generations before her. Her daddy was a Sutton, her granddaddy was a Sutton. Whole town knew her." He was quiet for a moment. "After she went missing, the lawyers locked the place up and it sat. Year after year, and every once in a while, somebody'd come around asking questions, and Cal Voss would run them off, and the place would sit some more. And folks here knew there was a reason it was sittin'. They knew there was a child somewhere. They knew somebody'd come for it eventually." The truck climbed. The road narrowed. The fir trees closed in on both sides, and the moss on their lower branches dripped onto the windshield. We crested a low ridge, and below us, in a hollow shaped like the palm of a hand, I saw it. A white clapboard farmhouse with a wraparound porch. A barn behind it with the door half off the hinges. A meadow gone to seed brown and lank in the November wet, and behind all of it climbing steep and dark into mist, the mountain. Buck Caldwell slowed the truck. "That's Hollow Ridge," he said quietly, "and that's the Sutton place." I looked at it through the windshield, and I felt something in my chest that I did not have a name for. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, "who is Rosalind Sutton to me?" He did not look at me when he answered. He kept his eyes on the road, and his voice was so low under the rain, I almost missed it. "That'd be your mother, miss." The truck stopped at the foot of the gravel drive. Buck Caldwell did not pull in. He sat there with the engine running and the windshield wipers thumping, and he looked at the house for a long moment, the way a man looks at a grave he has not visited in a while. "I'll walk you to the porch," he said. "I can walk myself." "I know you can, miss, but I'd appreciate it if you'd let me anyway." I let him. We got out of the truck. He took my duffel bag from the bed without asking and slung it over his shoulder, and we walked up the drive together in the rain. The gravel was old, half sunk into the mud. Johnson grass had grown up through the middle of the drive in a thin green stripe. At the foot of the porch steps, Buck stopped. Across the road, maybe 100 yards through the trees, there was another house. Smaller, cedar shake, a blue painted door. Smoke was coming out of the chimney in a thin, straight line. As we stood there in the rain, the front door of that other house opened, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was old, 70, maybe more. White hair pinned up, a heavy gray cardigan over a long, dark skirt. She stood at her porch rail and looked at us across the road, and even from 100 yards away in the rain, I could see that she was not surprised. She had been watching for me. "That'll be Hazel," Buck said softly. "Hazel Lindbergh. She has the key. She'll be the one to take you in." "You're not coming in." He shook his head. "This ain't my house to walk into, miss. Never was." He set the duffel bag down on the porch step. He touched the brim of his cap the way men of his generation do when they're leaving a woman in a place. And then he turned and walked back down the drive in the rain and got into his truck and drove away. I stood alone on the porch step of a house I had never seen before in my life and watched the old woman cross the road toward me. Her name was Hazel Lindbergh. She had a soft Norwegian inflection in the back of her vowels that she had not quite lost in 50 years of living in Oregon, and her eyes were the pale blue of sea ice. She climbed the porch steps without hurrying. She stopped one step below me and looked up into my face the way a person looks at a picture they have been carrying around in their wallet for a very long time. "You have her mouth," she said. "Whose mouth?" She did not answer that. She reached into the collar of her cardigan and brought out a key on a long brass chain. She unlocked the front door of the farmhouse and pushed it open. "Come in out of the cold, child." I picked up my duffel bag and went in. The inside of the house smelled like old paper and lavender and the kind of dust that has had 18 years to settle. The furniture was covered in white sheets. A grandfather clock stood silent in the front hall. Its pendulum stopped at 4:20. There was a coat tree by the door with a woman's wool coat still hanging on it, the same dark green. It must have been the day she walked out of this house and didn't come back. Hazel Lindbergh moved through the house the way a person moves through a museum she helps look after. She pulled back curtains. She lit a kerosene lamp on the hall table because the power had been off for 2 days and the line crew wouldn't be out until Monday. She walked into the front parlor and stood in the middle of it and waited for me to follow her. When I came in, she went to a roll-top desk against the wall, opened a drawer, and took out a brown envelope sealed with a circle of dark red wax. She held it out to me without a word. I took it. My name was written on the front. Not Ellie Hayward. Not the name on my baptismal certificate. Not the name in my school records. Not the name on the manila envelope from St. Brendan's. Something else. Something I had never seen before. For my daughter to be opened only in this house. Below it, in smaller letters in a different ink, and a steadier hand, Rosalind Marie Sutton, Cedar Hollow, Oregon, October 1964. The wax seal was a circle with a line through it, and inside the circle, a rose. I sank down on the edge of a sheeted chair without meaning to. My knees just did it. The envelope was in my hand, and the wax seal was unbroken, and the carving on the bottom of the wooden box in my coat pocket suddenly made a kind of sense it had never made before. Hazel Lindbergh sat down across from me in a chair of her own. She folded her hands in her lap, and she did not say anything for a long moment. She had clearly been rehearsing this moment for a long time, and now that it had arrived, she was letting me have it at the speed I needed. "Your mother," she said, "left this envelope with me on the 4th of October, 1964. She came across the road in the morning. She brought a thermos of coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table, and she gave me this envelope and a key. She asked me to hold them until her child came of age. She asked me to make sure no one else ever touched them. She did not tell me what was in them. She did not tell me where she was going. She kissed my cheek, and she walked back across the road. And 4 days later, her car was found at a logging pullout 14 miles up the mountain road. And they searched these woods for 3 weeks, and they did not find her." She paused. Her hands tightened a little in her lap. "She was 24 years old," she said, "and she had a baby girl 10 months old named Coraline. She had given the baby to a private adoption agency in Portland 3 months before. She had told no one in this town that she had ever been pregnant. She had told no one but me. I could hear my own breathing. My name is not Coraline," I said. Hazel Lindbergh looked at me steadily. "Child," she said gently, "I imagine it is." The first crack in the world I had been given was the manila envelope. The second crack was the wax seal in my lap. The third crack came on Monday morning in a brick storefront on the main street of Cedar Hollow in the upstairs office of a man named Calvin Voss. Calvin Voss was somewhere past 60. He had a white mustache and a vest with a gold watch chain across it, and the kind of careful country lawyer's manner that you do not see anymore in the cities. His office was on the second floor of the building above the hardware store, up a narrow stair with a brass rail. The window behind his desk looked out over the wet street and the diner across the way. He stood when I came in, and he came around the desk, and he took my hand in both of his, and he did not let go for a long moment. "Miss Sutton," he said, "I have been waiting 18 years to shake your hand." My name is Ellie Hayward. He held onto my hand a moment longer, and he looked into my face the way Hazel Lindbergh had looked into it on the porch in the rain. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I imagine that's what they told you. Please, sit down." I sat. He went back behind the desk. He took a thick file folder out of a locked drawer and laid it on the blotter between us. The folder was wrapped in cotton string. The cotton string was yellow with age. He untied it carefully, the way an old man unties old string he means to keep. "Your given name," he said, "is Coraline Marie Sutton. You were born here in Cedar Hollow in the back bedroom of the house you are presently staying in on the 3rd of January, 1963. The midwife was a woman named Iris Halloran, who is now deceased. The attending physician was Dr. Errol Penn, who is also now deceased. Your mother was Rosalind Marie Sutton, born here in 1940. Your father was a man named August Sutton. Yes, the same surname. They were second cousins." Which was not so very unusual in these hollows in those days, born here in 1935. He turned a page. "Your father died in an automobile accident on the Coast Highway on the 17th of August, 1963. You were 7 months old. Your mother survived him by 14 months. In the summer of 1964, she made arrangements through a Portland attorney for your private adoption. Sealed file. No identifying information. The arrangement was overseen on this end by my late father, who also practiced in this office. She insisted on a particular caveat. She insisted that the name on your adoption record be changed." He looked up at me. "From Coraline Sutton," he said to Ellie Hayward. There was a stillness in the room. I could hear the wet hiss of a car passing on the street below. "Why," I said, "Miss Sutton, why would she change my name?" Calvin Voss took off his glasses. He set them on the blotter beside the file. He looked at me for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was lower than it had been. "Because Miss your mother believed that someone was going to come looking for her child, and she did not intend for her child to be found." The fourth crack opened slow. It opened the way a frozen river opens in spring, with a sound under the ice that you feel in your boots before you hear it. Calvin Voss turned the page. "Your mother," he said, "was a journalist." I had not been expecting that. Nothing in the house. Nothing in the manila envelope. Nothing in 18 years at St. Brendan's had prepared me for that word. A journalist? "A reporter, ma'am, by trade." She had graduated from the journalism program at the University of Oregon in 1961. She had worked for the Eugene Register Guard for 2 years. After your father's death, she returned home to Cedar Hollow with the intention, I believe, of raising you here. But she did not stop working. She continued, ma'am, on a long story. A story she had been working on off and on since her sophomore year in college. A story about a company called Hale Whitmore Timber. The name meant nothing to me then. It is hard for me now to write it without my hands going still on the page. But that morning in Calvin Voss's upstairs office, it was just a name. a timber company. There were a dozen timber companies in the county. There were 100 in the state. I did not know yet what the name meant. I did not know what it had cost. Hale Whitmore, I said. Hale Whitmore Timber, family held, founded in 1903 by Marcus Hale the Elder, the largest private holder of old-growth timber acreage in southern Oregon, and at the time, your mother was looking into them, the second largest in the Pacific Northwest. Your mother believed, ma'am, that the original land acquisitions of Hale Whitmore in the period 1908 to 1922 had been carried out through fraud, forgery, intimidation, and in at least 3 documented cases, the murder of small homesteaders who refused to sell. She believed further that certain present-day operations of the company involved the systematic exploitation of seasonal workers' payoffs to 2 sitting state senators and the concealment of a fatal explosion at a Hale Whitmore mill in 1959, in which 7 men died, and the cause of death was misattributed in the public record. He paused. Your mother, miss, was not a small-town reporter writing pieces about the church social. She was building a case that, had it run, would have ended the Hale Whitmore family in this state, and she knew it, and so did they. I sat there. I could not speak. There was a thin ringing in my ears, the way a bell rings after it has been struck and the sound has gone, and yet you can still feel the bell. She did not abandon you, Calvin Voss said quietly. Miss Sutton, listen to me, ma'am. She did not abandon you. She placed you. She placed you somewhere they would not think to look. She gave you a different name, and she put you in a city orphanage 3 hours from here, under a sealed file, because she had begun to understand in the last summer of her life that they were going to come for her, and she did not want them to come for her child. I could not see him. I could not see the room. I could see in some corner of my mind a young woman of 24 in a kitchen I had now stood in, packing a baby's clothes into a small case, folding them slowly, setting them in, smoothing them flat, the way you fold a thing you mean to come back to and finish. And then she went up the mountain, I said. Yes, ma'am. And she did not come back. No, ma'am. Why? Calvin Voss put his hand flat on the file folder. That, miss, he said, is what your mother left in the cave. I went back to the farmhouse that afternoon, and I sat in the front parlor with the wax-sealed envelope in my lap. I had not opened it. Hazel Lindbergh had told me on Saturday evening that the envelope was mine to open whenever I chose to, but I had not been able to. Some part of me had known before Calvin Voss told me anything that whatever was inside the envelope was not going to be a sweet letter from a mother to a daughter. It was going to be a hand reaching out of the dark to take hold of mine. And once that hand took hold of mine, I was going to be pulled into something I could not get out of. So I had waited. But now I had been to the lawyer's office. And I had a name I had never known I had. And I had a father I had never known I had had and lost. And I had a story about a timber company that had eaten an entire valley alive. And the wax seal on the envelope no longer felt like a question. It felt like an answer that had been waiting. I broke the seal. Inside the envelope were 3 things. The first was a letter written in a steady cursive hand on lined paper dated October 3rd, 1964. The second was a photograph, black and white, with scalloped edges and a date stamp of August 1963 on the back. The third was a hand-drawn map. I read the letter first. My darling girl, if you are reading this, then you have done what I asked Hazel and Mr. Voss to make possible. You have come home. I am sorry, Coraline. I am sorry for every year you spent in that home in Portland, believing you were not wanted, because you were wanted, baby. You were wanted more than you can know. I held you. I held you for 10 months. I am holding you now on this morning with my left hand, while I write this with my right. I cannot keep you. I have learned things this summer that I cannot unlearn. Men have come around the house asking after my work. Men I do not know. A car has parked at the end of the drive twice in the night with its lights off. I have begun to receive telephone calls in which no one speaks. 2 weeks ago, the lock on the cellar door was broken from the outside, and nothing inside the cellar was taken because everything inside the cellar was already gone. They are coming, Coraline. I do not know when. I do not know how. But they are coming. I have a choice in front of me. I can stop. I can let what I know stay inside my head, and I can raise you here in this house, and they will let me. I have been given to understand that they will let me. Mr. Hale himself sent a man to this house on the 17th of September with a message. The message was that if I withdrew my story and surrendered my notes, no one would ever speak my name again. That was the language he used. No one would ever speak my name again. But baby, what your father died for cannot be put down. He did not die in that car. They will tell you he did. The papers will say he did. The state will say he did. He did not. I know what happened to your father, Coraline. I know who was in the car behind him on the coast highway that night. And if I stop now, then your father died for nothing, and the 7 men at the Whitmore Mill died for nothing, and the homesteaders in the Upper Valley died for nothing, and the truth dies with me. I cannot let it die with me, so I am taking it up the mountain. I am taking everything I have, every page, every photograph, every name, every date, and I am putting it in the only place left in this country that they have not found, and I am giving you the only key to that place. The wooden box you have carried since you were small holds the key. The key has been with you all along. You have only to know how to find it. The map enclosed with this letter shows you where to go. Hazel will help you. Mr. Voss will help you. Buck Caldwell, if he is still in this town, will drive you to the trailhead. He was your father's closest friend. He has been waiting for you. He does not know what he is waiting for, but he is waiting. Coraline, listen to me. Do not go up that mountain alone. Do not tell anyone in town what you are doing. Do not under any circumstances trust anyone whose last name is Hale. Marcus Hale is an old man now, but his grandson is your age, and he has been raised on this. He has been raised to believe that what is in that cave belongs to his family. He will come for you, baby. He will smile, and he will be charming, and he will use a name that is not his name, and he will come for you. I have to put down this pen. The light is changing. I love you, Coraline. I have loved you every day. I will love you every day after. Mother, I read it twice. I read it a third time. Outside, the November rain had started again, and it was coming hard against the windows of the front parlor, and a single drop had found a soft place in the ceiling and was dripping into a tin pail Hazel had put there before she left for the evening. I picked up the photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, dark-haired, slim, standing on a porch step. The porch was the porch I had walked up 2 days earlier. Beside her, with his hand on her shoulder, was a tall man in a denim shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He had a long jaw and a quiet smile and eyes that were the same shape as the eyes I had been looking at in mirrors for 18 years. On the back, in the same careful handwriting, August and Rosalind, Coraline, 3 days old. Hollow Ridge, January 1963. I sat in the parlor for a long time after that. Around 6 o'clock, I heard the back door of the house open. It did not open the way Hazel had opened it that morning, with the key calling out my name from the kitchen so that I would know it was her. It opened slowly. It opened the way a door opens when somebody does not want a door to be heard opening. I had not turned on the kerosene lamp. The front parlor was dark. I sat very still in the wing-back chair with the photograph in my hand. There was a soft creak of weight on the floorboards of the kitchen. A pause. Another creak. Whoever had come in had stopped just inside the back door and was listening. Then the footsteps began slow and careful, moving from the kitchen into the back hall, into the dining room around the table, stopping at the foot of the stairs, moving on, coming down the hall toward the parlor where I was sitting. My hand closed around the letter and the photograph. 20 feet from where I sat, a flashlight clicked on. The beam swept across the parlor wall, across the sheeted couch, across the empty hearth. It did not find me because I was tucked back into the wing of the chair, and because the chair was angled away from the door, and because I had stopped breathing. The light moved past me. The flashlight stopped on the roll-top desk against the wall. A man's voice, very low, very calm, almost gentle, said, "Come on, baby. Show me where she put you." He was talking to the desk. He was looking for the envelope. He had come into this house at 6 o'clock in the evening on a Monday, expecting it to be empty. He had come in through the back door because he had a key or because he knew which window in the mudroom did not latch properly. He had walked through the kitchen and the dining room and the back hall the way a man walks who has done it before more than once, who has done it many times. And he was standing now in the dark of the parlor, looking for what my mother had hidden 18 years after she had hidden it. He was looking for me. I did not move. I did not speak. I sat in the wing-back chair with the broken wax seal in my lap and the photograph of my parents in my hand, and I watched the beam of his flashlight crawl across the wall, and I understood, finally, 3 things. I understood that my mother had not been paranoid. I understood that whatever was in the cave up on Hollow Ridge was not just paper and not just photographs. It was a debt that had been waiting 18 years for somebody to come pay it or somebody to come collect it. And I understood, watching the flashlight beam, that I was not safe. Not in this house, not in this town, not anywhere until that debt was settled. The flashlight moved on. The man, I could not see him. Only the long, thin beam of his light opened the roll-top desk and rummaged through the drawer. He moved with the patience of someone who had done it before. The envelope was not there, of course. The envelope was in my lap. The wax seal had been broken an hour ago by my own hand. After a few minutes, the flashlight clicked off. The footsteps moved back down the hall, through the dining room, through the kitchen. The back door opened. The back door closed. Outside, faint on the gravel of the back drive, I heard the soft step of boots, and then nothing. I sat in the wing-back chair until I could no longer hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then I got up. I lit the kerosene lamp on the hall table with hands that did not shake, because I had decided in the dark of the parlor that they were not going to. I walked through the house room by room with the lamp held in front of me. I checked the back door. The bolt was thrown and the chain was on. He had not come through the back door. I checked the mudroom window. The latch had been worked loose from the outside gently with something thin. He had come in through there. He had come in through there before. There were faint old scuff marks on the white painted sill that I had not noticed in the daylight. Scuff marks that had been made over months, maybe over years. I checked the cellar door. The hasp was bent, not new, old, bent so long ago the rust had grown into the bend. I went back upstairs to the bedroom Hazel had made up for me. I sat on the edge of the bed with the wooden box in my lap. The carving on the bottom, the circle, the line, the rose caught the light of the kerosene lamp and threw a small shadow. My mother's letter was on the quilt beside me. The wooden box you have carried since you were small holds the key. The key has been with you all along. I turned the box over. I ran my thumb across the rose as I had run my thumb across the rose 10,000 times in 18 years. I pressed it. It did not move. I pressed harder, the way I had pressed it as a child of 7, with all the strength of a small thumb, trying to make a thing that did not belong to me give up what it carried. It did not move. I stopped. I sat there on the edge of the bed in a strange house, in a strange town in the November rain. And I thought about the man with the flashlight, about the soft step of his boots on the gravel, about the patience of him, about the way he had spoken in that low, gentle voice to the desk. Come on, baby. Show me where she put you. The next morning, I went across the road to Hazel Lindbergh's house, and I told her what had happened. I told her about the back door and the flashlight and the desk. I told her about the voice. I told her I was going up the mountain. She set her coffee cup down very carefully on the saucer. Child, she said, the mountain is a 4-mile climb on a marked trail that has not been maintained in 18 years. There are rock falls on the upper switchbacks. The cave is set into a cliff face. Your mother knew that mountain like the back of her hand, and she did not come down from it. You will not go up there alone. I am not asking for permission, Mrs. Lindbergh. She looked at me for a long moment. Her pale blue eyes did something I had not yet seen them do. They softened and they sharpened, both at once. No, she said quietly. You are not. She rose from the kitchen table. She crossed to a cabinet beside the sink, and she opened the lower door. She reached behind a stack of mason jars, and she brought out something wrapped in a piece of oilcloth. She set it on the table between us, and she unwrapped it. Inside the oilcloth was a small canvas day pack neatly packed, a coil of rope, a pair of leather gloves, a map of the mountain trail hand-marked, a canteen, a flashlight with fresh batteries beside it, and tucked along the side in a small leather case, the polished brass tube of an old hunting scope. I have been packing this bag, Hazel Lindbergh said, for 18 years. She lifted her eyes to mine. And the man who is going to walk up that mountain with you is presently sitting in the diner across from the hardware store, drinking his second cup of coffee, the way he has done every Tuesday morning for 31 years, waiting for somebody to give him a reason. I left her kitchen with the pack on my shoulder and the wooden box in my coat pocket, and my mother's letter folded against my heart. I walked back across the road to the farmhouse. I walked up the porch steps. I stood on the porch and looked east toward the dark mass of Hollow Ridge rising above the meadow in the soft gray light of a wet Oregon morning. Somewhere up there, 4 miles in and 1,000 feet up, was a cave. Somewhere up there, my mother had walked in the autumn of 1964 with a leather satchel and a key and a story she would not let die. Somewhere up there, she had laid that story down on a stone. And somewhere down here in this valley, in this town, was a man with a flashlight and a soft voice and a patience, 18 years old, who wanted what she had laid down and who would not stop looking for it. I was 18 years and 2 months old. I owned a duffel bag, 2 changes of clothes, a wool blanket, a toothbrush, $1,100 in cash, 90 acres of Oregon timberland, and a wooden box with no keyhole that held the only key to the only place left in this country that the Hales had not found. I tightened the straps on the pack. I stepped down off the porch. I went to find Buck Caldwell. The diner was warm and the windows were fogged. Buck Caldwell was sitting at the same stool he had been sitting on Saturday afternoon. He was facing the door. He did not look surprised when I came in, and he did not stand up. He pushed a clean cup across the counter toward the empty stool beside him, and he nodded once at the woman behind the register, and the woman poured coffee into the cup without being asked. I sat down. I set the pack between my boots on the floor. I did not say anything for a long minute because I did not know how to begin a thing that had been waiting 18 years for me to begin it. So I drank the coffee. It was strong and a little burnt, and somebody had put a small pitcher of cream beside it without my asking. "Mrs. Lindbergh said you'd be here," I said. "She would," he said. "She said you've been having coffee in this seat every Tuesday morning for 31 years. Sounds about right. She said you've been waiting." He turned his coffee cup a slow quarter turn on the saucer. "I wouldn't have put a name to it like that, miss," he said. "But yes, ma'am, I expect that's what I've been doing." Outside, the rain had thinned to a drifting mist that drifted past the diner window in pale gray sheets. A logging truck rolled by on the wet street with a chained load of fir logs the size of pickup trucks, and the windows of the diner trembled, and the pitcher of cream rattled softly on the counter, and Buck Caldwell did not look at it. "Mr. Caldwell," I said quietly, "somebody came into my house last night." He set the cup down. For the first time since I had met him, something moved in his face that was bigger than the face could quite hold. It moved through him the way a tremor moves through the floor when a logging truck passes outside. It was gone in a second, but it had been there. "What did he take?" he said. "Nothing." He was looking in the desk. He didn't know I was in the chair across the room. "You see him?" "No, sir. He had a flashlight." He talked to the desk. He said, "Come on, baby. Show me where she put you." Buck Caldwell put both his hands flat on the counter on either side of his cup. He looked down at them for a long moment, at the faded Marine Corps tattoo on the back of his right hand, and at the wedding band on his left that I had not noticed Saturday, and that I noticed now, and he was very still. "All right, miss," he said. "All right. We'd best be going up the mountain." We did not go that afternoon because Buck would not climb the mountain in the wet. He said the upper switchbacks would be slick as glass, and he was not about to break my leg the second day of my life as a free woman. He said we would go at first light Wednesday. He said the front was supposed to clear by midnight and that Wednesday morning would be cold and bright, and that was what we wanted. He drove me back to the farmhouse himself. He did not drop me at the foot of the drive this time. He came up the drive and he parked the truck in front of the porch, and he got out and he walked the perimeter of the house. He walked all the way around it, slow, looking at the windows and the doors and the sills. He stopped at the mudroom window in the back, and he ran his thumb along the latch, and his face did something quiet I did not like. "He's been coming in this way," he said, not really to me. "How long, I wonder?" He took a screwdriver out of the toolbox in the bed of the truck, and he sank a fresh 2-inch wood screw into the sill and through the bottom of the sash, and he tested it, and he nodded. "He'll have to break glass to come in now," he said. "And if he breaks glass, we'll hear him. He looked at me from the back porch. "I'm sleeping in the truck tonight, miss," he said. "In the drive, if that's all right with you." I had not known until that moment that I had been holding something in the middle of my chest with both hands for the last 14 hours. I let it down. I let it down a little. "Yes, sir," I said. "That's all right with me." The front cleared at 2 o'clock in the morning, the way Buck had said it would. I knew because I woke up. I sat up in the brass bed in the back upstairs bedroom of my grandparents' house, and I listened, and what I was listening to was the absence of rain. The rain had been coming down on the cedar shake roof for 3 days, soft and steady, and now it was not. There was only the small tick of the house settling into the cold, and somewhere far off down the valley, the long, lonely call of a freight train moving south through the Coast Range. I lay back down. I did not sleep again. At 4:15, I heard Buck Caldwell get out of the truck in the drive below my window. I heard him cough once into his fist, the way men cough at 4 in the morning when they have been sitting in a cold cab and have not slept all the way through. I heard him walk the perimeter of the house once more. I heard him stop briefly at the mudroom window. Then I heard him walk back to the truck. At 5, I came down the stairs in my heavy jeans and my wool sweater and the boots Hazel Lindbergh had set by the back door for me on Sunday morning without asking my size. The boots fit. The boots had belonged to my mother. Hazel was already in the kitchen. She had let herself in at 4:30 with her key. She had built up the wood stove. She had a pot of coffee going on the burner, and she had bacon laid out on a black iron skillet, and there was a brown paper sack on the table with sandwiches and a thermos and 2 apples and a small wax paper packet of dried venison that smelled like smoke. "You will eat," she said without turning. "Sit." I sat. She poured me coffee and she put bacon on a plate in front of me and a fried egg and a thick slice of brown bread, and she stood at the stove with her back to me, and she did not look at me while I ate. "Your grandfather used to come into this kitchen at 5 o'clock in the morning," she said quietly to the stove, "and he would eat exactly this breakfast on exactly that plate every day of his working life. Patrick Sutton was a man who believed that a day's labor required a day's worth of food laid in at the beginning of it, and he would not be argued with on the point. Your mother used to argue with him anyway. She was the only one of his children who would. He loved her for it.
You knew my grandfather.
I knew them all, child.
You knew my mother.
She turned finally. She looked at me across the kitchen with the spatula in her hand. The pale blue of her eyes in the lamplight was the color of a cold pond before a snow. Child, she said, I knew your mother better than anyone living. She turned back to the stove. You eat, she said. We will talk about that on a day that is not today. Buck came in at 5:45.
He came in through the back door, and he stamped his boots on the rag rug, and he hung his coat on the hook by the door,
and he did not say good morning, because Buck Caldwell did not say good morning. He nodded at Hazel. He took the cup of coffee she put in his hand. He drank half of it standing at the sink, looking out the window at the dark. Then he turned, and he looked at me across the kitchen, and he said one word. Ready. It was not a question. I nodded. He set the cup down.
All right then, miss, he said. Let's go see your mother's mountain. The trailhead was 14 miles up the county road from the farmhouse, and the last 6 miles of it were not paved. Buck drove the F-100 in second gear most of the way. The road climbed in long switchbacks through stands of Douglas fir, so tall and so close that the headlights only carried 20 feet, and on the far side of every bend, the road dropped away into a canyon you could not see the bottom of in the dark. Buck did not speak. He drove with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road, and now and again he checked the rear-view mirror, and once, on a long straight pitch about 3 miles from the trailhead, he slowed the truck down to 15 miles an hour and watched the mirror for a full minute before he was satisfied. Mr. Caldwell, I said, is somebody behind us? No, miss, not now. He did not say not yet. He did not have to. The trailhead was a wide gravel pullout at the end of a logging spur marked with a single weathered sign that said Hollow Ridge Trail and an arrow pointing into the trees. The sign was so old the letters had faded to the gray of old bone. There was a wooden information kiosk beside it with the glass front broken out and the map inside it long since gone to mold. Buck parked the truck. He killed the engine. The silence after the engine died was so complete that I could hear my own breath in my chest. He sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel. This is where they found her car, miss, he said quietly. Right where we are sitting. October 8th, 1964. Wednesday morning. Sheriff Pruitt came up here on a missing persons call, and he found her car parked right here, and he found her keys in the ignition, and he found her purse on the passenger seat, and he did not find her. I looked out through the windshield at the dark wall of fir. They searched these woods for 3 weeks, Buck said. I was one of the men they had searching, miss. We had 30 men, And we had dogs from the sheriff's department in Coquille, and we had a deputy from Eugene who had worked search and rescue in the Cascades for 9 years. We did not find her. We did not find a footprint of her. We did not find a torn thread of her clothing. She did not leave a trail off this pull-out, miss. She left a trail to this pull-out. We backtracked her boots 3/4 of a mile up the trail, and then her boots disappeared as if she had been lifted off the ground. He was quiet for a long moment. I have walked that 1/4 mile every November for 16 years, he said. I have walked it slow. I have walked it on hands and knees in places. I have not seen what happened to her. I do not believe a man took her, miss. I do not believe a bear took her, and there were no bears on this ridge that year. I believe your mother walked off this trail under her own power, and I believe she did so because she did not want to be followed. You think she's alive? No, miss, I do not think that. I think she walked into that mountain to put something where it would never be found. And I think when she had put it there, the mountain kept her. He opened the door of the truck. Let's go see what she went up there to hide, he said. The trail climbed steep from the first 100 yards. It was a foot wide in places and 6 inches wide in others. It had not been brushed in 18 years, and the salmonberry and the salal had grown across it in mats that we had to push through, and the lower switchbacks were slick with red clay where the rain had been working at them for 3 days. Buck went first. He carried a long walking staff he had cut from a vine maple sapling the night before, and he had a coil of 3/8 inch climbing rope over one shoulder, and on his belt, in a worn leather sheath, was a bowie knife with a brass-pinned handle that I had not seen in the diner or in his truck or in his coat. He had brought it from somewhere. He climbed slow and steady. He stopped every 100 yards to let me catch up, and he did not turn to look at me until I was beside him. He never let me out of sight behind him. I climbed in his footsteps. I could not have done it any other way. The trail was that bad. He picked his foot placements with the practiced patience of a man who had been a hunter all his life, and I put my boots in the dark prints he left in the clay. The pack rode high and tight on my shoulders. The wooden box was tucked in the inside pocket of my coat against my heart, where it had been for 14 years. A mile up, we came around a bend, and the trees opened, and I stopped. The valley spread below us in the slow gray light of dawn. From up here, you could see the whole shape of it. The hollow itself was a long oval bowl in the green floor of the coast range, and the river that had cut it, the Little Squaw, was a silver thread along its bottom. The farmhouse was a white speck against the brown of the meadow. Hazel Lindbergh's cedar shake roof was just visible a softer shade of brown across the road. The town of Cedar Hollow itself was tucked in the throat of the hollow where the river turned west, and from up here, the steeple of the white church was no bigger than a child's pencil. I had not seen it from above. I had not seen until that moment that the hollow
had the shape of a hand, a palm, and 4 fingers. The fingers were ridges, and Hollow Ridge was the longest of them, the index finger pointing east into the mountains.
Your great-great-grandfather settled the bottom of this hollow in 1879,
Buck said quietly. He came down from Wisconsin with a wagon and a yoke of oxen and a sick wife, and the wife died on the trail at Fort Hall, and he came on alone. He filed the original homestead claim on 160 acres along the river. He cut the trees with an axe. He pulled the stumps with a span of mules. He built that farmhouse with his own hands and a hired carpenter out of Marshfield.
and his son Patrick was born in the back bedroom in 1908, and Patrick took it over in 1934, and Patrick built the barn, and Patrick worked these woods all his life.
My grandfather,
Your grandfather, Miss. Patrick Sutton was a working man. He was a logger and a small claim miner in the Depression, and after Pearl Harbor, he was a sergeant of infantry in the 82nd Airborne, and he jumped at Salerno, and he jumped at St. Mare Église, and he came home in 45, and he never went off the land again. Not to vacation, not to visit, not for a wedding. He died in 1959 of the cancer he had got, the doctor said, from the lead and the zinc in the mines up the ridge. He was 51 years old. He was the most honorable man I ever knew, miss, and I have known a few.
Buck looked east toward the high mass of Hollow Ridge above us.
And there is something I am about to tell you, Coraline, that you need to hear from me before we go any further. Because if you do not hear it from me, the cave will not make sense to you when you see it.
It was the first time he had used the name. I felt it land in my chest like a hand laid flat. Yes, sir. He sat down on a moss-covered log beside the trail. He laid the walking staff across his knees. He looked out at the valley for a long moment, and then he turned to me.
The cave on Hollow Ridge, he said, is older than the Suttons. The Suttons did not dig it. The mining company that operated up here in the 20s did not dig it. The Coquille people knew about it long before any white man set foot in this country. There is a story among them. I have it from a man named Walter Charley, who was your grandfather's foreman in the upper claim, and who died in 71, that the cave is a place where things that ought not to be lost are taken to be kept.
Birth records, marriage records, names of the dead, songs that are dangerous to forget. The cave under Hollow Ridge has been a memory vault, miss, for as long as there have been people in this country to remember.
He paused. When your grandfather Patrick came home from the war, he said he came home angry. He was not an angry man before that war, I am told, and he was not an angry man after the war was over. But in those first years, he was angry. He had seen things in Europe he did not have words for. And he came home, and he watched the Hale Whitmore Timber Company buy out the small claims along this valley, one by one, sometimes by fair price, and sometimes not. And he watched men he had grown up with sign deeds at the courthouse, and then go home and find themselves drinking. And he watched the Coquille families that had been here 3,000 years be pushed off allotment land
They had been granted by treaty, and he understood that what was being lost was not going to be put back.
Buck's voice dropped.
And so Patrick Sutton Miss made a quiet agreement with Walter Charlie and with 3 other old men in this valley, whose names I will not give you yet, because 2 of their grandchildren are still alive in this town. They agreed that the cave under Hollow Ridge would be a vault. They agreed that any man or woman in this valley who had a thing they did not want, lost, a deed, a name, a confession, a witness statement, the deposition of a dying timber boss who would not say his piece in court, but would say it on his deathbed to a neighbor. Any such thing could be carried up that mountain and laid down in that cave, and the cave would keep it. And that for as long as there was a Sutton on this land, there would be a keeper. And that the Sutton would never read what was kept. The Sutton was a door, not an eye. The Sutton's job was to keep the door. The morning had gone very quiet. Even the birds in the upper canopy were quiet.
Your grandfather kept that door for 14 years,
Buck said. And when he died in 59, your grandmother, Mary, kept it for 2 years until her heart gave out. And then your mother came home from college, Miss. She came home with a journalism degree, and she came home with a man she loved, and that man was your father, August Sutton, and they took the door together. And it was while they were keeping the door in 1963 that your mother began to understand exactly what the Hales had done to this valley over 60 years. Because she could read the things in the cave because she was the keeper, and the keeper has the right. I sat down on the log beside him. I could not stand up. That's what I'm going up there to find, I said. Yes, miss. Not just my mother's notes. No, miss. 60 years of it, and your mother's notes on top. And the Hales know it's there. He nodded slowly.
The Hales have known it is there since the day your mother put her story together, miss. Marcus Hale is 90 years old this winter, and he has been looking for that cave for 18 years. He has paid timber cruisers to walk this ridge in every season. He has hired private detectives out of Portland. He has had a man on this town for 16 of those 18 years. The man does not live here. The man rotates through every few months under a different name. He stays at the Spar Hotel. He drinks coffee at Maeve's. He has never set foot on Sutton land that anyone could prove. And he has been waiting, miss, just like the rest of us, for you to come home and open that door. I sat there on the log with my hands flat on my knees. I thought about a man with a flashlight in a dark parlor in the rain. I thought about, come on, baby, show me where she put you. I thought about how patient he had sounded. Mr. Caldwell, I said, is he up here right now on this trail? Buck. Caldwell turned and looked at me, and his weather-gray eyes were perfectly steady. I have been watching for him since we left the trailhead, miss, he said. I have not seen him, but I have not stopped watching. We climbed the next 2 miles in silence. The trail rose through a long bench of old-growth Douglas fir,
the trunks of them 6 and 7 feet across at the base, their crowns lost in the lifting mist 150 feet over our heads. The air on the bench smelled of cedar and wet moss and the iron of old volcanic stone. Buck stopped twice to listen. He did not say what he was listening for. The second time, he stood for a full 2 minutes with his head cocked and his right hand resting on the haft of the Bowie knife. And when he started moving again, he was satisfied. The third ridge was a climb up a long rock face on a hand and foot scramble. Buck went first. He scouted the road. He doubled back and showed me the holds. He climbed beside me, not above me, and not below, and at the worst pitch, a sloping slab of basalt over a 50-foot drop into a slot canyon. He tied the rope around my waist with a bowline and held the other end belted to a small fir at the top. And he walked me up the slab with the patience of a man teaching a daughter to ride a bicycle. At the top of the rock face, the trail leveled. We were on a narrow shelf of stone wedged between the wall of the ridge above us and a sheer drop below. The shelf was maybe 4 feet wide. It curved away around the shoulder of the mountain. Buck stopped. He pointed. 20 yards along the shelf, half hidden by a great moss-furred curtain of rhododendron, was a dark mouth in the rock. "There she is, miss," he said quietly. "That's the cave." The entrance was lower than I had expected. Maybe 4 feet high. The opening was framed in black volcanic stone furred with old moss, and the dark inside it was the kind of dark that you do not see in cities and you do not see in the woods. It was the dark of a place the light had never reached. Buck did not go in. He set the rope down. He shrugged off his pack. He sat with his back against the rock face beside the mouth of the cave, facing the way we had come, and he laid the Bowie knife across his thigh. "I'll watch the shelf, miss," he said. "You go in alone." "I don't, Coraline." It stopped me. "Your mother left this for you," he said. "Not for me, not for Hazel, not for Cal Voss, for you. I have waited at the mouth of this cave for 18 years to watch a Sutton walk into it. I would not deny you the walk, miss, by taking the first step for you." I stood there for a long moment with the wooden box pressed against my heart through the wool of my coat. Then I unclipped the flashlight from the pack. I clicked it on. I ducked low and I stepped into my mother's mountain. The cave was cool and dry inside. The floor was smooth worn by water that had stopped flowing here 1,000 years ago. The walls were close. I could touch them with both hands if I spread my arms. The ceiling was low enough that I had to walk in a half crouch. The beam of the flashlight slid along the stone and caught a small painted handprint on the wall. Faded red ochre, the size of a child's hand. I stopped. I looked at it. I did not touch it. I went on. 20 feet in the passage widened. I came out into a small round chamber, maybe 12 feet across, with a domed ceiling high enough to stand under. The flashlight beam swept the chamber
and what it found stopped me where I stood. The walls were covered with carving. Names, hundreds of names. Some had dates beside them. Some had short phrases. They had been cut into the soft volcanic stone with knives and chisels, and in places by what looked like the tips of old steel files. The earliest dates I could pick out were from the 1870s. The most recent in a hand I did not recognize was 1964. Patrick Sutton Keeper, 1945 to 1959. Mary Halloran, Sutton Keeper, 1959 to 1961. August and Rosalind Sutton Keepers, 1961 to 1964. I touched my father's name with the tip of my finger. I had never said it out loud. August, I whispered. The cave did not answer. The cave was older than any name in it. I moved the light across the chamber. Against the far wall, on a low natural ledge of stone, were stacked the things the keepers had kept. There were old leather satchels brittle with age. There were cigar boxes. There were tin biscuit tins with the labels worn off. There were 3 locked wooden chests with iron bands. There was a folded blanket neatly folded, with a small carved wooden bird laid on top of it. There were 2 glass mason jars with rolled papers inside them, sealed with wax against the damp. And on a flat stone in the center of the chamber, on a kind of altar that the keepers must have made, was a box. It was not like the others. It was newer. It was a green metal footlocker, the kind the Army had issued by the 100,000 in the 1940s, with a hinged lid and a brass clasp and a stenciled white serial number along one side. The paint on it had faded to the color of an old uniform. The brass clasp was not locked. I crossed the chamber to the altar. I knelt beside the locker. I put my hand on the lid. I closed my eyes for a moment. I do not know what I was praying for. I do not pray by habit. I had stopped praying at St. Brendan's when I was 12. But I closed my eyes there in the cave under Hollow Ridge on my knees in front of a green Army footlocker that my mother had put there in October of 1964. And I asked of whatever was listening for the strength to open what she had left for me. I opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in heavy oilcloth, were the things I had walked 4 miles up a mountain to find. A stack of stenographers' notebooks, 6 of them bound with twine. Each one had a date written on the cover in my mother's careful hand. The first was dated June 1961. The last was dated October 1964. A manila folder full of photographs, black and white. Some of them were of papers, ledgers, contracts photographed off a desk under a single lamp. Some of them were of buildings. Some of them were of men I did not know. A second manila folder thinner, labeled Witnesses. Inside it were typed sheets of paper, each one signed at the bottom in a different hand. Sworn statements. A third folder labeled Mill Fire, August 1959. I did not open it then. I did not have the strength.
a leather wallet that had been my father's. His driver's license was inside. He had been 31 years old. He had brown hair and brown eyes and a long jaw, and the smile, even in a driver's license photograph, of a man who had liked his life. And underneath all of it, wrapped in a soft cotton baby blanket, the pale yellow of early sunlight, was a single sheet of paper, a birth certificate. State of Oregon, County of Coos, issued January 4th, 1963. Mother Rosalind Marie Sutton, Father August Sutton, Child Coraline Marie Sutton. In the lower right corner, inked from a small foot smaller than my hand, were 2 perfect baby footprints. I sat down on the cold stone floor of my mother's mountain, and I held the birth certificate in my lap, and I cried for the first time in 18 years. I cried without sound because the cave was small and Buck was outside, and I did not want him to hear it. I cried for a woman who had folded her child's blanket and laid it on top of the only thing she had left of her child. I cried for a man named August who had died in a car on the coast highway 18 years and 3 months ago, when I was 7 months old, before he had ever taught me to walk. I cried for a girl in a city orphanage who had been told for 14 years that her mother had left her a wooden box and nothing else. I cried until I was finished. Then I wiped my face on the sleeve of my coat. I folded the birth certificate gently, and I put it inside the cotton baby blanket. And I put the cotton baby blanket inside the inside pocket of my coat, where the wooden box was. I put the rest of the things in the footlocker back the way they had been. I lifted the locker off the altar. It was heavier than I had expected, but I could carry it. I carried it out of the chamber down the low passage past the small ochre handprint and out into the gray daylight of the shelf. Buck Caldwell was on his feet. He had heard me coming, and he was waiting, and when he saw the locker in my arms, he did not say anything. He just took one of the handles, and I took the other, and we set it down on the stone between us, and he looked at me, and I nodded, and he nodded, and there were no words yet for the thing that had passed between us. He picked up his pack. He picked up his end of the locker, and we started back down the mountain. We were a mile from the trailhead when Buck stopped on the trail. He stopped because the truck was visible through a gap in the trees down below us, parked where we had left it on the gravel pullout, and beside the truck was a second vehicle that had not been there when we went up, a dark green Chevrolet Blazer. It was parked nose to nose with Buck's F-100, close enough that the F-100 could not pull out without the Blazer moving first. The driver of the Blazer was not in the Blazer. He was leaning against the front fender of Buck's truck with his arms folded across his chest, like a man waiting for a friend. He was young, about my age, maybe 25. He was tall and slim in a fitted dark green canvas jacket and clean denim and brown leather boots that were the wrong kind of boots for these mountains. His hair was the color of dry sand and it was cut neat. He had a pleasant face. He was looking up the trail. He was looking for us.
Buck set his end of the footlocker down very quietly on the trail. "Miss," he said softly, "step back behind that big fir on your left, please. Do it now. Do not run. Just step." I stepped. The fir was a Douglas fir, maybe 7 feet across at the base. I tucked myself against the uphill side of it, where the rise of the slope put another foot of cover between me and the pullout below. Buck stayed in the open on the trail. He raised his right hand slowly in a long, easy wave, the way a man waves to a stranger. The man at the truck waved back. Even from this distance, I could see him smile. "Coraline," Buck said quietly, without turning his head. "Do you remember what your mother wrote in her letter?" I did, every word of it. "Do not under any circumstances trust anyone whose last name is Hale. He will smile, and he will be charming, and he will use a name that is not his name, and he will come for you." "Yes, sir. All right then, miss. You stay where you are. I am going to walk down to the pullout, and I am going to have a friendly word with that gentleman, and if I scratch the back of my neck with my left hand, you come down. If I take off my hat, you turn around, and you climb back up this mountain just as fast as your boots will move, and you do not look back, and you do not stop until you are inside that cave, and you do not come out of that cave for anything, miss, until you hear my voice call your name. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Say it back to me. Left hand to neck, I come down. Hat I run." "Good girl." He picked up the walking staff. He left his end of the footlocker on the trail beside mine. He started down toward the pullout at a slow, easy pace, as if he were a man who had spent the morning hiking by himself and had nothing on his back but his lunch. From behind the great trunk of the fir, I watched. The man at the truck pushed himself off the fender. He smiled wider as Buck came down. He raised his hand again in a friendly greeting and started walking up the trail to meet Buck, and the two of them stopped about 30 feet from the pullout on a level patch of ground. I could hear their voices on the cold air. Just barely. Just enough. "Morning," the young man said. His voice was warm, friendly. "You wouldn't be Mr. Caldwell, would you, Buck Caldwell?" "That'd be me." "Andrew Murray. I work for Cal Voss over in Coquille. He sent me up to find you. He said you were taking the Sutton girl up the ridge this morning, and there's been some news from Portland on her file he wants her to hear today. Said you'd most likely be coming down about now." Buck Caldwell stood with the walking staff planted in front of him, both hands on top of it. "That right?" he said. "Yes, sir." "Mr. Voss send you up alone, did he, son?" "He did." "In a green blazer?" "That's right." "What's the news from Portland?" The young man hesitated, just the smallest of breaths. A man who had not quite expected to be asked. "It's well, sir. It's about her birth records. There's been a development. Mr. Voss wanted to tell her in person.
Buck Caldwell did not move. The walking staff was steady in front of him.
Son, he said quietly, Cal Voss does not have an office in Coquille. Cal Voss has an office over the hardware store in Cedar Hollow. He has had that office for 41 years. There is not a man, woman, or child in this county who would tell you Cal Voss works out of Coquille. So whoever told you to come up here and use his name did not bother to do you the courtesy of getting the name of the town right.
He did not raise the staff. He did not need to. The young man's smile did not falter. But something behind the smile went very still, the way a creek goes still when something walks up on it to drink.
Sir,
he said, slow now in a softer voice.
I think there's been a misunderstanding.
Andrew Murray, you said.
Yes, sir. That's not your name, son, is it?
Sir.
Hale, is it?
I saw the young man's right hand move. It moved fast. It moved inside the canvas jacket, and it came out with a small black pistol, and he raised it level with Buck Caldwell's chest from 20 feet away. And at the same instant, Buck Caldwell stepped half a pace to the left and brought the vine maple staff up in a long, sweeping arc that caught the young man's wrist from the outside and drove the pistol straight up into the air. The pistol fired. The shot cracked off the rock face of the ridge and rolled back through the trees in a long, flat echo. The young man swore. He did not lose the pistol. He brought it back down, and Buck was already inside his reach, and the staff came down again across the young man's collarbone, and the young man staggered back, and as he staggered, his eyes went past Buck and up the trail and found me behind the fir. He saw me. He saw the footlocker on the trail behind me. He saw what I had carried out of the mountain. His whole body changed. He stopped fighting Buck. He shoved Buck sideways with both hands, and Buck went down on one knee on the wet trail, and the young man brought the pistol up and pointed it past Buck, up the trail, and pointed it at me.
Step out, Coraline, he called. He was breathing hard. He was still trying to smile. Step out, sweetheart, and bring the box with you, and nobody else gets hurt today. Mr. Caldwell here is a Marine. He'll understand. Won't you, Mr. Caldwell?
Buck Caldwell, down on one knee in the wet leaves of the trail, looked up the slope. He looked at me. He took off his cap with his left hand slow and laid it gently on his thigh. That was the signal. Hat off. Run. I did not run. I have asked myself in every year since why I did not run. I had been told to. I had promised I would. The trail behind me went 4 miles back up the mountain to the cave, and the cave was where I had been told to go, and the man in front of me had a gun, and Buck Caldwell was down, and every reasonable thing in my body was telling me to turn around and climb. I did not turn around. I stepped out from behind the fir tree onto the trail. The young man's smile widened
That's better, he said. Come down, honey. Bring the box. I came down. I came down slowly. I came down one careful step at a time on the wet trail because I was not running and because the foot locker was on the trail just behind me and because the young man with the pistol was watching only me now. He had taken his eyes off Buck Caldwell. He had let the muzzle of the pistol drift up to point at the center of my chest, and Buck Caldwell, on one knee at the man's feet, was no longer in the line of fire. 10 feet from the footlocker, I stopped. I knelt. I unclipped the latches. The young man took a step closer up the trail to see. I lifted the lid of the footlocker. I reached inside. I lifted out the long object that my mother had laid in the bottom of the locker on the 3rd of October, 1964. Underneath the cotton baby blanket and the birth certificate and the witness statements and her 6 bound notebooks of evidence. The object she had wrapped carefully in oilcloth and tied with twine and labeled in her own careful hand for my daughter, if the day comes that she needs it. The day had come. The oilcloth fell away. In my hands was my grandfather, Patrick Sutton's 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun. The same shotgun he had carried through the woods of this hollow for 30 years of his working life. The same shotgun his daughter Rosalind had cleaned and oiled and packed in waxed cloth and carried up this mountain for the day her own daughter might need it. The walnut stock was warm and worn smooth in the places his hand had worn it smooth. The hammers were back. The shells were in the chambers. I knew because my mother had written it on a small piece of paper folded inside the oilcloth. Both barrels loaded with double-aught buckshot Coraline. The safety is the small lever under the trigger guard. Push it forward to fire. Do not point this at anything you do not intend to kill. Aim center mass. Brace against your shoulder firm. I love you, baby. Mother. I came up off my knees with the shotgun stock to my shoulder. The young man froze. The pleasant smile was gone. The charm was gone. What was left in the gray morning light on Hollow Ridge was the face of a young man who had been raised since boyhood to believe that what was in that cave belonged to his family, and who had not, in any of the long years of his raising, allowed for the possibility that the keeper might come home and might point her grandfather's shotgun at his chest. "Drop the pistol," I said. He did not drop it. He looked at me. He looked at the shotgun. He looked at Buck Caldwell, who had risen to one knee and was rising to both, and who was reaching for the Bowie knife. He looked back at me. "You don't know how to use that thing," he said quietly. "I know how to point it at your chest," I said. "My mother left a note, center mass, both barrels. I will not miss from here, Mr. Hale. Drop the pistol." For one long second, he looked at me, and I saw him weigh it. Then he dropped the pistol. It thumped softly on the wet trail. Buck Caldwell came up off the ground all the way and put the Bowie knife to the young man's throat from behind.
and the young man's hands went up slowly to either side of his ears. "On your knees, son," Buck said. The young man went down on his knees on the wet trail. Buck looked at me over the young man's shoulder. His weather-gray eyes were not steady anymore. They were shining.
"Miss," he said softly, "you hold that gun on him just like that. Don't you move. Don't you take that bead off the center of his shirt. I am going to walk down to that blazer of his, and I am going to get the keys, and I am going to get whatever he has got in the cab, and I am coming straight back. You stand right there." "Yes, sir." He went. I stood on the trail with my grandfather's shotgun braced firm against my shoulder, the way the small piece of paper had told me to brace it. And I held the bead steady on the center of Drew Hale's chest, and the rain began to come down again, soft, through the great cathedral of the old growth. I did not lower the gun. The young man on his knees in the wet leaves looked up at me at last, and he said very quietly, "She would have been proud of you. You know that. She would have been proud." "Don't," I said. He looked down again. We stood like that, the two of us, the keeper and the boy who had come for the door, while Buck Caldwell walked down to the blazer and came back up with 2 coils of nylon rope and a roll of duct tape and a thing in his coat pocket that I would not see until later, and the morning light through the firs above us after 3 days of rain was the soft, pale gold of an old wedding band. Buck Caldwell had been a Marine. He had been a sergeant of infantry in the 1st Marine Division at the Chosin Reservoir in the winter of 1950, and he had learned in that winter, at the age of 24, how to tie a man's wrists in a way that would not let go and would not cut off the blood. He used what he had learned on Drew Hale that morning on Hollow Ridge. He tied Drew Hale's wrists behind him with the length of the nylon rope from the blazer. He tied Drew Hale's ankles. He sat Drew Hale down with his back against the trunk of the great Douglas fir where I had hidden. He took off Drew Hale's belt and his good leather boots and the watch on his wrist and the wallet from his jacket and laid them on a flat stone beside the trail, like a man laying out evidence in a deposition. He took the pistol that Drew Hale had dropped, and he popped the magazine out of it, and he worked the slide and caught the round in his palm, and he put the magazine in one pocket of his coat, and the loose round in the other, and the empty pistol into the footlocker on top of my mother's notebooks. The thing in his coat pocket I had not seen earlier turned out to be a small chrome revolver, an old pattern Smith & Wesson with a 2-inch barrel and a worn rubber grip, the kind of pistol a man carries when he wants the weight of a gun on his hip without the inconvenience of one. He did not draw it. He did not need to. He set it on the stone beside Drew Hale's wallet so that Drew Hale could see it. Then he sat down on the wet log opposite Drew Hale and lit a cigarette. The first I had seen him smoke, and he smoked it slowly while the rain came down through the firs. I lowered the shotgun. My arms had begun to shake. They had not shaken while the gun was up. They shook now. I sat down on the footlocker. "Miss," Buck Caldwell said gently,
without taking his eyes off Drew Hale. "Are you all right?" "Yes, sir." "Are you hurt?" "No, sir." "Did you ever in your life fire a shotgun before this morning?" "No, sir." He nodded slowly. He drew on the cigarette. He let the smoke out through his nose. "Your mother knew you might have to," he said. "I would like a minute, miss, to make my peace with what your mother knew." I let him have the minute. The rain ticked softly on the moss. Somewhere up the ridge a raven called once, then twice, then nothing. Drew Hale sat against the fir with his head bowed and his sandy hair gone dark with rain, and he did not speak. He had not said a word since I had taken the shotgun off his chest. After a while, Buck Caldwell stood.
"Miss," he said, "we are going to walk out of here. We are going to take this young man with us. We are going to drive him into town. We are going to put him in the front office of Cal Voss, and we are going to make a long-distance telephone call to a number in Portland that Cal has been keeping in a locked drawer in his desk for 11 years, and then we are going to sit down and wait. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Can you walk the rest of this mountain?" "Yes, sir." "Then let's go home." We came down off Hollow Ridge in a slow file. Buck went first with Drew Hale's wrists still bound behind him, walking the prisoner down the trail in front of him by the collar of the green canvas jacket. I came behind them with the shotgun cradled across my left arm, the way Buck had shown me broken open at the breech, so that the chambers were visible, the safety I had not had to use forward where it could be seen. The footlocker stayed on the trail. Buck said we would come back for it when the work down in town was done. At the pullout, Buck put Drew Hale in the bed of the F-100 and bound his bound wrists to the strap of the toolbox and laid him on his side on the cold steel of the bed and pulled a tarp over him against the rain. Then he got behind the wheel. I climbed up beside him. He turned the F-100 around in the gravel, and the Blazer with its keys in his pocket stayed where it was, and we drove down off the mountain in second gear and did not speak for the first 3 miles. Then Buck Caldwell said very quietly, looking out through the windshield at the wet road, "Miss, you do not have to tell me, but I would like to know one thing." "Yes, sir." "What was in the box?" I knew which box he meant. Not the footlocker, the wooden box, the one I had carried in my coat for 14 years. I had not opened it yet. I had not had the chance. I had spent the morning 4 miles up a mountain. I reached inside my coat and brought it out, and I turned it over on my palm, and I looked at the carving on the bottom, the circle, the line, the rose. And I understood then what I had not understood before. The line through the circle was not a line. It was a key. A long, thin key drawn lying across the circle of the rose, exactly the length of the line. And the rose itself, the carved rose with its small, worn petals, was not a rose. It was a keyhole. It had been a keyhole all along. The petals folded over a small recess in the wood that I had pressed 1,000 times and had never thought to look inside.
I felt the carving with the tip of my smallest finger.
There was a small, almost invisible split between the second petal and the third. A seam I had taken for a flaw in the wood. I worked my fingernail into the seam. It lifted. A small wooden disc the size of a fingernail popped up out of the bottom of the box. Underneath it, set down into the wood in a recess no bigger than a thimble, was a small brass key. Old, worn. A key with no markings on it and no decoration, just the shape of a key, cut by hand by a man who had cut keys all his working life. I lifted it out. I held it up to the watery gray light coming through the windshield of Buck Caldwell's truck. "Miss," Buck said, "what does that key open?" "I don't know," I said, "but I know who does." Cedar Hollow was still on a Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. The diner had 2 cars in front of it. The hardware store had 1. The barber shop had its open sign on, but there was no one inside, just the old barber, asleep in his own chair with a newspaper across his lap. We drove down the wet main street in the F-100, and a woman in a yellow rain slicker crossing the road in front of us stopped and looked at us as we went by, and her eyes met mine through the windshield, and she did not wave. She had recognized the truck. She had not recognized me. She would by supper time. The whole town would. Buck pulled up in front of the hardware store. He got out. He went up the brass-railed stair to Cal Voss's office without saying anything to me, and he was back down in less than 3 minutes with Cal Voss behind him. The old lawyer in his vest and shirt sleeves without a coat, in the rain hurrying down the wet sidewalk with a key in his hand to unlock the side door that led to the back office where clients were not normally taken. They took Drew Hale up the side stair into the back office. Buck took one of his elbows and Cal Voss took the other, and the boy with the sandy hair and the wet collar did not resist them. They put him in a wooden chair against the far wall of the back office, and Buck tied his ankles to the legs of the chair, and Cal Voss locked the door from the inside. I stood in the front office with the wooden box on the corner of Cal Voss's desk and the small brass key in my palm.
Cal Voss came out of the back office. He closed the connecting door behind him. He stood for a moment with his hand on the doorknob. Then he turned, and he looked at me, and his face had gone the gray of his hair.
"Miss Sutton," he said in a voice I had not heard from him before, "I am going to make a telephone call. I am going to ask you to sit at my desk and not speak. The man I am calling is not in the directory. I have had his number in a locked drawer of this desk for 11 years. He is an agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation out of the Portland field office. His name is Bertram Coyle. He will know mine when he hears it. He has been waiting, miss, just like everyone else." He went to the desk. He sat down. He took a small black book out of his vest pocket. He turned the pages with the careful patience of an old man. He found the page. He picked up the heavy black telephone receiver and dialed a long-distance number with the tip of his pencil. The line connected on the 3rd ring. "Bertram," Cal Voss said quietly. It's Calvin Voss in Cedar Hollow. He listened for a moment. She came home, Bert, he said. She is sitting in my front office right now. She walked up that mountain this morning. She walked back down, and she did not come back alone. We have got Marcus Hale's grandson tied to a chair in my back room. He came up the mountain after her with a .45, and he tried to use it on Buck Caldwell, and the girl took a shotgun off him at 20 feet. And Bert, you need to come down here today. You need to come down here today. He listened again. He nodded once, twice. Yes, he said. Yes, all of it. The notebooks, the witness folder, the mill fire file, the photographs, and Bert. There is something else. There is a key. I do not yet know what it opens, but I have a guess, and I think you are going to want to be the one in the room when she puts it in. He set the receiver down very gently on its cradle. He looked at me across the desk. He will be here by 4 o'clock this afternoon, he said. He is leaving Portland now. He is bringing 2 men with him. They will take Mr. Hale into federal custody. He will not be returned to this town. I nodded. I could not speak. Cal Voss looked down at the key in my palm. He looked at the wooden box on the corner of the desk. He looked at the brown envelope, the one with the broken wax seal that I had laid on the desk beside the box, without realizing I had taken it out of my pocket. Miss Sutton, he said gently, there is a safe in the back wall of this office. It was installed in 1923 by my grandfather, the year he opened this practice. It is a Mosler Safe Company combination safe. It has, in addition to the combination, dial a single keyhole at the base of the dial. The keyhole has never been used in my lifetime. I had assumed it was a relic. My father told me before he died that it was not. He told me that there was a key for it, and that the key was not in this office, and that the key was not in his possession, and that the key was in the keeping of the Sutton family, and that if a Sutton ever came to this office with a small brass key cut by hand and asked to use the safe, I was to let her. He looked at me steadily. Would you like to see the safe, Miss Sutton? I followed Cal Voss into a small windowless room behind his front office that he had used all his working life as a private library. The walls were lined with law books from floor to ceiling. There was a single brown leather chair, very worn. There was a green-shaded desk lamp on a small reading table, and in the far wall, behind a hinged section of bookshelf that Cal Voss swung open with a small brass latch, was the safe. It was bigger than I expected. It was the size of a small icebox. It was painted dark green. There was gold script across the front that said, Mosler Safe Company, Cincinnati, Ohio. And below the script, there was a brass combination dial worn shiny by 60 years of fingers. And below the dial, set flush into the green steel of the door, was a single small keyhole. Cal Voss spun the dial with the same careful patience he had used on the telephone. Left, right, left. The internal mechanism made a soft, metallic tick. He gripped the handle. He looked at me. The combination was set by your great-grandfather in 1923, he said. It has not been changed. It is the date he buried his wife on the Oregon Trail. He turned the handle. The bolts moved back inside the door with a sound like an old clock striking. The handle stopped. The door did not open. Cal Voss stepped back. "Now you miss," he said. I stepped forward. I put the small brass key into the small keyhole below the dial. It went in clean. It turned with the soft, perfect resistance of a key that had been cut for a single lock by a single hand 60 years before, and that had been waiting in a wooden box in the hands of a girl in a Portland orphanage for 14 of those 60 years to come home and turn. The door of the safe swung open. What was inside the safe was not what I had expected. I had been expecting more papers, more notebooks, more photographs. Another folder labeled with one of my mother's careful labels. Inside the safe were 3 things. The first was a steel drawer about 18 inches deep, set into the floor of the safe. The drawer had a small brass pull. I did not open it yet. The second was a stack of bound papers the size of a phone book. They were tied with red ribbon. The label on the top in a careful hand that was not my mother's and was not Cal Voss's and was an older hand than either of them read Sutton Family Trust. Established January 1923 by Patrick Cornelius Sutton. Trustees see attached. The third thing in the safe was a metal box smaller than the foot locker on Hollow Ridge, but heavier. It was a steel cash box of the kind banks used to issue to depositors before the federal insurance laws. It was painted black. It had no markings. Cal Voss did not touch any of it. He stepped back. He folded his hands in front of him. He waited. I lifted out the bound stack of papers first. I set it on the reading table under the green shaded lamp. I untied the red ribbon. I opened the top page. It was a trust document, 41 pages long, drawn up by Cal Voss's grandfather in 1923, modified by Cal Voss's father in 1949, never modified since. The trust was titled the Sutton Family Trust for the preservation of the Hollow Ridge lands and the memory of those lost to the Hale Whitmore Timber Company. I read the first page. I sat down in the brown leather chair to read the second page. The trust held in 1923 the sum of $4,200 deposited by my great-grandfather, Patrick Cornelius Sutton, from the sale of the small lead and zinc claim he had worked above Hollow Ridge in the years 1916 to 1922. The trust had been invested over the intervening 60 years in conservative instruments overseen by the Voss law firm in a sealed account held at the First National Bank of Coquille. The trust had no living beneficiary at the present date because the last living Sutton was presumed dead. In the event a Sutton heir was located, the trust was to be transferred to that heir in its present value less administrative fees on the terms set out in the addendum. I turned to the addendum. The present value of the Sutton Family Trust, as of the last quarterly statement, dated September 30th, 1981, was $2,411,000. I read that number twice. I read it 3 times. I looked up at Cal Voss. He looked back at me. He did not say anything. He did not need to. I set the trust documents down very carefully on the reading table. I opened the small black steel cash box. Inside the cash box was a thick stack of bearer bonds, the kind that the United States Treasury had stopped issuing in 1981, but that you could still cash if you were the one who held them. There were also old stock certificates, dozens of them in companies whose names I half recognized. Pacific Bell, Standard Oil of California, United States Steel. They had been purchased. The small white slips clipped to each one showed in the years 1923 through 1958 and never sold. I closed the cash box. I set it on top of the trust documents. I knelt down on the floor of the safe. I pulled the brass handle of the steel drawer. The drawer slid out smoothly on oiled runners. Inside it, laid flat in a single neat row, were strips of photographic film, microfilm, dozens of strips. They had been wrapped in oilcloth and were now sealed in small glassine envelopes against the air. On the front of each envelope in my mother's careful hand was a typed label.
Hale Whitmore Payroll Ledgers, 1908 to 1922. Hale Whitmore, Land Acquisitions, Coquille River Valley, 1909 to 1920. Includes original deeds and notarized affidavits of forgery. Whitmore Mill, Fire Internal Memoranda, 1959. Includes signed admission by mill foreman Donald Glasgow of cause of explosion suppressed at time of inquest. State Senator Roy Hollings, correspondence with Marcus Hale, 1962 to 1964. Includes record of payments through Coquille Citizens Bank.
State Senator Edwin Pruitt, correspondence with Marcus Hale, 1958 to 1964. Includes record of payments and itinerary of suppressed audit. Coquille Tribal Allotment Lands, 1910 to 1934. Affidavits of 3 Coquille elders documenting fraudulent acquisition. Witnessed by Patrick Sutton, Walter Charley, Reverend Eldred Boone. There were 23 envelopes, 23 rolls of microfilm, 60 years of evidence photographed by my mother in the summer and fall of 1964. In the back office of the Hale Whitmore Timber Company headquarters in Coquille, on a Minolta camera she had purchased with her last paycheck from the Eugene Register Guard, and brought back here to her family's lawyer, and laid in this safe and locked, and the key carried up the mountain and laid into a wooden box. I knelt on the floor of Cal Voss's library, and I looked at 23 glassine envelopes, and I understood that my mother had not gone up that mountain to hide her story. She had gone up that mountain to leave me the key to it. Bertram Coyle of the Portland Field Office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation arrived at the side door of Cal Voss's office at 4:17 that afternoon. He was a tall man, 50 years old, with iron gray hair cut very short, and a charcoal suit and a black tie. He had a square jaw and quiet brown eyes, and he moved like a man who had been a county deputy in his early years before the Bureau and had never forgotten
how to walk into a room. With him were two younger agents in dark suits and a woman in a tan raincoat who was introduced to me only by her first name, Margaret,
and who I would learn later was a senior attorney in the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Oregon. They went into the back office first. I did not watch. I sat in the front office with Cal Voss and Buck Caldwell. Hazel Lindbergh had come into town when she heard the F-100 go by her house, and she sat with us too in the wooden chair by the front window. Her hands folded in her lap, her pale blue eyes on the wet street outside.
I could hear voices through the door. I could hear Bertram Coyle's voice, low and even. I could hear Drew Hale's voice, no longer warm, no longer charming. After a long time, I heard Drew Hale begin to cry. Bertram Coyle came out of the back office at 6:05. He walked across the front office to me. He sat down in the chair beside the desk. He did not offer me his hand because he understood in a way I had not yet learned to expect of strangers that I had not been touched by anyone in a very long time. "Miss Sutton," he said quietly, "I want to tell you several things, and I would like you to listen to all of them before you say anything. Is that all right?"
"Yes, sir." "The first thing is that the young man in the back office has agreed to tell us everything he knows. He is 28 years old, miss. He has known what his family did for the last 11 years. He has been part of it for the last 6. He is going to give us names, dates, accounts, and the location of 3 properties his grandfather owns in Nevada under Shell Holdings. He is going to testify, miss, against his grandfather, Marcus Hale, against his father, Edmund Hale, and against the corporate officers of Hale Whitmore Timber Company. He is going to do this because we have offered him the possibility of a reduced sentence, and because, miss, I think also because of you."
"Me?"
"Because of what he saw on Hollow Ridge this morning, Miss Sutton. He saw a young woman who had every reason to pull a trigger on him and did not. He told me just now that he had been raised to believe you were a person who did not exist, and that he understood when you lowered the shotgun and let Mr. Caldwell tie his hands that he had been raised wrong. He is 28 years old, miss. He is not a child, but he is, I think, a man who has just understood for the first time that he has been a child." He paused. "The second thing," he said, "is that the materials in that safe are sufficient in my professional judgment to convict Marcus Hale of 3 counts of murder in the 2nd degree, 11 counts of conspiracy, and a great many federal counts I will not bore you with this evening. We will have warrants issued tomorrow morning. Marcus Hale will be arrested in his home in Coquille by Thursday. He will not see the outside of a federal prison again, miss. He is 90 years old. He will die there." I nodded. I did not feel anything yet about that. I do not know if I have even now. "The third thing," Bertram Coyle said, and his quiet voice went quieter still, "is the matter of your father." The room went still.
I felt Hazel Lindbergh's hands go still in her lap by the window. I felt Buck Caldwell's breath stop. Cal Voss did not move.
Miss Sutton, Bertram Coyle said, I have been an agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 26 years. I came into this case in 1965 when I was a young agent newly assigned to the Portland office, and a tip came in to my section chief about a missing journalist in Southern Oregon and a timber company that did not want her found. I have worked this case on and off ever since. I know your mother's file. I know your father's file. I know what is in both of them and what is not. And there is a thing in your father's file, miss, that I have not been able to tell anyone in this town until this evening, because to tell, it would have been to end a life that has been protected at great cost for 18 years. He took a breath. Your father, August Sutton, did not die in that car on the Coast Highway in August of 1963. Miss Sutton. I did not understand the words. I heard them. I heard each word. I could not put them together. He was supposed to die, Bertram Coyle said. The car was supposed to go over the cliff with him in it. He had been driving home from Coquille that night. He had been making notes on a meeting he had had with the foreman at the Whitmore Mill, a man named Donald Glasgow, who had told him finally, after 4 months of your mother and father working on him, what had really happened in the explosion of 1959. He had a sworn affidavit in his coat pocket. He was bringing it home to your mother. And someone, miss, who had been told that he was bringing it home, ran his car off the Coast Highway 22 miles south of Coos Bay at 11:40 that night. The car went over the cliff. It struck a sandbar at the bottom and broke apart. The body was not recovered. The state of Oregon issued a death certificate based on the testimony of the responding deputy, who was a man on Marcus Hale's monthly payroll and who reported finding identification and personal effects in the wreckage. He stopped. What the deputy did not know, miss, he said, is that your father had been thrown clear of the car 20 feet before it went over the edge. He had been thrown into a stand of salal on the inland side of the road. He had 2 broken ribs and a concussion, and a deep cut along his hairline that would have killed him in another hour of cold and rain. He was found at 12:30 that night by an off-duty federal game warden named Earl Coyle, who happened to be driving south on the Coast Highway and who happened to be my older brother. The room had stopped breathing. My brother put your father in the back of his pickup truck under a tarp, Bertram Coyle said. He did not take him to a hospital, miss, because by 12:30 that night, every hospital between Coos Bay and Florence had received a call from a man calling himself a county deputy, asking after a survivor of the wreck. My brother understood the situation. He drove your father in the back of his truck 410 miles north to Portland, and he delivered your father to the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office at 6 o'clock the following morning. And he told my section chief everything he knew, and the section chief made a call, and a doctor came in, and your father was put on a medical flight to Quantico, Virginia, by 10 o'clock that night. He looked at me. Your father has been alive, Miss Sutton, for the last 18 years. He has been in the Federal Witness Security Program. He has been waiting, miss.
He has been waiting for the day Marcus Hale would be brought into a courtroom and his testimony would be required. He has been waiting for that day because he was told in the autumn of 1963 that if he made contact with anyone in this town, including his wife, the people who had run him off the coast highway would finish the job. He had no way to know that autumn that his wife was going to come up the mountain a year later with their daughter's birth certificate and a baby blanket and a key. He has known it since 1966, miss, when my section chief told him. He has waited 15 years to meet his daughter. He has been told by my section chief that the case would not be made until the daughter was of age.
Bertram Coyle paused.
Miss Sutton, he said gently, your father is in a safe house in Bend, Oregon, 4 hours from here. I spoke with him by telephone yesterday afternoon in advance of this meeting because I understood the materials in this safe were likely to be sufficient. I told him that we were 90% certain his daughter had come home. He has been on a plane for the last 6 hours from a city I will not name. He landed in Eugene 2 hours ago. He has been driven down the coast highway.
He is presently in a car, miss, about 40 minutes north of Cedar Hollow.
He took a long breath.
If you would like to meet him this evening, Miss Sutton, he said, I can have him at this office by 7:15. You are not required to. You are not required to do anything tonight, but I have been authorized to ask. I sat in the chair in Cal Voss's front office, and I did not move. I did not move for a long time.
Outside, the rain had stopped, and the early dark of November had come on, and the street light at the corner of the hardware store had come on, and the light from the street light fell pale across the wet sidewalk. A man came out of the diner across the street and stood for a moment under the awning smoking a cigarette, watching nothing. The town did not know yet. The town would know by morning. In the back office behind the closed door, I could hear the soft sound of one of the FBI agents speaking very gently to Drew Hale. Drew Hale was not crying anymore. He was answering the agent's questions one at a time slowly, the way a young man answers his father after a long, bad year. I looked at Hazel Lindbergh by the window. She was looking at me with her pale blue eyes, and her hands were folded in her lap. She had been the keeper of my mother's secret for 18 years, and she had been the keeper of my own arrival for the 4 days I had known her, and now she was the keeper of the question Bertram Coyle had set in front of me. She did not tell me what to do. She nodded once very slightly. I turned back to Bertram Coyle. Yes, sir, I said. Please have him brought here.
August.
Sutton walked through the door of Cal Voss's front office at 7:22 on the evening of November 17th, 1981. He was 46 years old. He had brown hair gone gray at the temples and a long jaw and the same eyes I had been looking at in mirrors for 18 years. He was wearing a navy wool overcoat over a flannel shirt
and clean denim and work boots that had seen wear. There was a small white scar along his hairline, the cut a federal game warden had stopped bleeding in the back of a pickup truck on a coast highway in the autumn of 1963. He stopped just inside the door. He looked at me. I looked at him.
Neither of us could move for the longest moment of my life. Then he came across the office slowly, the way a man crosses a room he has been carrying inside himself for 18 years. And he stopped 2 feet away from where I had stood up out of my chair. And he said very quietly, "Coraline." It was the first time I had heard a man say it. It broke me. I went into his coat, the way a child goes into her father's coat. And I do not remember the next part very clearly, because I was crying so hard. And he was crying too. His big hands on the back of my head and across my shoulders, the way a father holds a daughter. He has held only as a baby and has been forbidden to hold as a child. And he kept saying my name, my real name, Coraline, Coraline, my Coraline, into the top of my hair, and he smelled of clean wool and pine soap and the cold air he had brought in from the night. We held each other for a long time. I do not know how long. Buck Caldwell, when I finally looked up, had taken his cap off and was holding it in both hands. Cal Voss had taken his glasses off and was polishing them on the lining of his vest with a degree of concentration that suggested they had never been polished before.
Hazel Lindbergh by the window had let her ears go down her old and had not bothered to wipe them. Bertram Coyle had stepped out of the room to let us have it.
My father pulled back and looked at my face. He held it between his hands the way a man holds a thing he has only seen in a single photograph for 18 years. He looked at my eyes. He looked at my mouth. He looked at the small scar above my right eyebrow that I had got at 6 years old, falling off a swing in the yard at St. Brendan's. He touched it with his thumb very softly.
"That was on you the morning you were born," he said. "I thought it was the way the light fell. It was not. It was a scar. I told your mother. She did not believe me. She said no baby is born with a scar."
"It is from a swing," I said. He smiled very slowly. It was the smile in the driver's license photograph. It was the smile in the porch picture from January 1963.
"You will tell me the story of the swing," he said. "You will tell me every story."
"Yes, sir." He pulled me back into his coat. He held me there until I had stopped shaking.
Marcus Hale was arrested at his home in Coquille on Thursday morning, the 19th of November, 1981. He was 90 years old. He did not resist. He asked for a glass of water before they took him out of the front parlor, and his housekeeper brought it on a silver tray, and he drank half of it and set it down on the marble side table. And he walked out the front door of the house his grandfather had built in 1907 between Bertram Coyle on one side and a young agent named Riggs on the other. And he did not look back.
Edmund Hale. My father's old enemy was arrested at the headquarters of Hale Whitmore Timber in Coos Bay the same morning. He resisted. He swore. He attempted to telephone the state attorney general from his desk and was told that the state attorney general would not be taking his call. He was taken out the front door of his own building in handcuffs in front of his secretary and 3 timber cruisers and an old foreman who had worked for the company 41 years and who, the agent who arrested him said later, stood up from his coffee in the lobby and tipped his hat as Edmund Hale was walked past him. Drew Hale was transferred to federal custody in Portland on the morning of the 20th, where he gave a sworn statement to 2 assistant United States attorneys that ran to 430 pages. He was indicted with his father and his grandfather. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts and testified in the spring trial of 1982 for 9 days. He served 8 years of a 14-year sentence at a federal facility in Sheridan, Oregon. He sent me, in the autumn of 1989, a short letter that I keep in a drawer of the desk in the front parlor of the farmhouse and that I have not yet decided to answer. The first trial ran 4 months. The second ran 6. The Hale Whitmore Timber Company was placed in federal receivership in March of 1982 and was broken up and sold in fragments through the rest of that year. A portion of the proceeds went by order of the court to the surviving families of the 7 men killed in the Whitmore Mill explosion of 1959. A larger portion went to the Coquille people as restitution for the allotment lands fraudulently acquired between 1910 and 1934. The Coquille Indian Tribe Restoration Act was signed into law by President Reagan in June of 1989, and although there were many forces at work on that signing, the documents in my mother's microfilm were among them. My father came home to Hollow Ridge in the spring of 1982, after his testimony in the first trial was finished. He moved back into the farmhouse he had built half of with his own hands at 26. He spent the summer of that year with Buck Caldwell, replacing the roof, the porch, the floor of the back hall, and the kitchen stove. He never lived anywhere else again. He and Hazel Lindbergh sat together on her porch on summer evenings for the next 16 years. He took her arm down the steps the year her left hip went bad. He read to her in the last 6 months of her life the entire works of Sigrid Undset in the original Norwegian, which he had taught himself in 3 months of nights at the kitchen table, because she had told him one evening that she missed the sound of her mother's language. Hazel Lindbergh died in her own bed across the road in March of 1998, at the age of 89, with my hand in hers and my father's hand on her shoulder. She did not leave a will. She did not need to. She left a note in her Bible in her own small, careful hand that read, "The farmhouse and the road and the mountain were never mine. Tell Coraline I was only the door. She was the one who came home." Buck Caldwell lived until 2003. He died at 77 of a stroke in his sleep in the front bedroom of his small house on the south end of Cedar Hollow on the night of the first heavy snowfall of that winter.
He had eaten supper with my father and me the evening before. He had told a long story over coffee about the Chosin Reservoir that he had never told anyone. He had laughed twice. He had walked himself home in the snow without his cap. We buried him in the cemetery above the river next to his wife Eleanor, who had gone before him in 1979, and his son, who had gone before her at 19 in a war I will not name here. I established the Sutton Lindbergh Trust in the summer of 1983 with the proceeds of the bearer bonds and the stock certificates and one half of the Sutton Family Trust. The other half I held back on Cal Voss's advice in case I should ever need it. I have not needed it. The Sutton Lindbergh Trust funds, to this day, a network of 41 private inquiries a year on behalf of adults aged 18 through 40, who were placed in closed adoptions in the states of Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana between the years 1940 and 1980. The trust does not promise to reunite a person with a parent. It promises only to find the truth of where a person came from and to put that truth in writing in the person's hand. It is enough. I have learned in 44 years of running it that for most people, it is enough. I have not yet told the last part. The last part is small. The last part is the part I want to tell. On a clear, cold morning in the late spring of 1982, after the first trial had ended, and Marcus Hale had been led away from the defense table in cuffs for the last time, my father and I went up Hollow Ridge together. We did not take Buck Caldwell. He had offered. We had thanked him. We had told him this one we needed to do by ourselves. We climbed the trail slowly. My father was 46 years old, and he was not yet in the climbing shape he would be in by the autumn of that year. He stopped where Buck Caldwell had stopped 6 months before, on the moss-covered log on the bench of the old growth. He looked down at the valley. He did not speak. We went on. At the cave on the shelf of rock above the Slot Canyon, I crawled in first. My father came behind me. The chamber inside, with the carved names of the keepers on the walls, was the same. My father stood for a long time looking at his name on the wall, and my mother's name beside it in his own hand in the fall of 1961. He took out a small steel chisel and a small ball-peen hammer he had carried up in his coat pocket. He held them out to me. I took them. I knelt on the cold stone floor below the line of names. I steadied the chisel against the soft, volcanic rock. I struck the head of the chisel with the hammer. The stone took the cut easily. I worked for a long time. When I was finished, there was a new line under my father's name and beside my grandfather's, in a fresh hand, the soft, pale gray of new-cut volcanic stone showing under the carving. Coraline Marie, Sutton Keeper, 1981. And below it, deeper in the largest letters in the cave, the letters my mother had earned and had not lived to cut for herself, Rosalind Marie Sutton. Mother, Keeper, 1940 to 1964. She did not leave. She put down the door. My father stood behind me. He did not speak. After a long while, he put his hand on the back of my head, the way a father puts his hand on the back of his child's head, and he kept it there. We walked out of the cave together. The valley below us was full of light. Somewhere down at the bottom of it, a white farmhouse stood, and behind the white farmhouse, a barn with new shingles on the roof, and across the road, a small cedar shake house with a blue painted door and smoke coming out of the chimney in a thin, straight line. I was 19 years and 7 months old. I was the keeper of Hollow Ridge. I was home.